Hello and welcome to today's webinar on SERDP funding opportunities. My name is Laura Mack and I will be moderating today's session. We will get started in just a few moments, but while we wait for others to join, I would like to cover a few logistical items. Today's broadcast will be listen only. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. You may submit questions by using the Q&A box on the black control panel on your screen, but you do not need to wait until the Q&A period to submit your questions. In fact, we encourage you to submit them in advance of that session. The phone lines will remain listen only throughout the presentation, so we will not be taking any questions verbally. We will not be able to answer any questions about specific proposal ideas or technologies during this webinar. If you run into any technical problems, please send your issues through the chat box, which is also located on your control panel. Please note that both the audio and the presentation of today's session will be archived on our solicitation webpage in case you would like to refer to them in the future. Today's speakers are Dr. Herb Nelson, the Executive Director of SERDP, Dr. Andrea Leeson, the Deputy Director of SERDP and Environmental Restoration Program Manager, Dr. Robin Nissan, the Weapons Systems and Platforms Program Manager, Dr. Kurt Preston, the Resource Conservation and Resiliency Program Manager, and Dr. Dave Bradley, the Munitions Response Program Manager. Before I turn it over to Herb, I remind phone participants that this is a listen-only session, and to submit questions, please use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. All right, after you, Herb.
Thank you very much, Laura. So we could go to the next slide, please. And so Laura has already read all the names of the presenters. So you know those things, but here they are written down in words so you can see them if you need to reference. We appreciate you all being here. I'd like to welcome everybody. I see we've got participants from both across the United States, and also I see a couple of Europeans, so can't really say good morning or good afternoon, but we're welcome that you're here. Laura, could we go to the next slide, please? So the subject of this presentation is the Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program, FY22 Call for Proposals, and that's on the left-hand side of this slide. Many of you know that we also have a companion program called the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program, which is a demonstration validation slide. That's not the subject of this presentation, but the call for proposals for ESTCP will be released right after the first of the calendar year, the first week in January. So you can, if you have an idea that's more demonstration validation rather than an R&D science and technology issue, you may want to check back in early January. Slide 4, please. So here are a few details about SERDP. It was established by Congress in 1991, so it's quite a long-standing program. We're a partnership among the DoD, the Department of Energy, and the EPA. And we have quite a strong advantage in SERDP in that we are, in DoD words, a 6.3 program element. That means advanced development. But we have authority to support from basic research through advanced development. So technologies at various levels of maturity can slot into SERDP quite well. And we work on either DoD unique issues or environmental issues that are costing the department a lot of money. We're clearly a mission-oriented program, so we focus on DoD issues, but there are many things we work on that are both DoD and other agencies and other country issues. Next slide, please. So this is just a graphical illustration of what I talked about in one of the bullets on the other slide. This is the typical Department of Defense funding profile for a technology adapted to us. So you can see on the left-hand slide, SERDP funds both basic and applied research and advanced development. And then as the technology becomes more and more mature, we would move on to demonstration validation and ultimately implementation. And the last two of those then would be ESTCP. We are housed in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment. And so as you will see when we get to the statements of need and what we're looking for, a lot of the stuff our customers are in sustainment. Next slide, please. So there's really two sets of things that drive our work. The first is sustainability of ranges, facilities, and operations of the department. You can see on this slide an example of a number of things that impact the ability of the DoD to train or to test on their ranges. And they range from marine mammals in the upper left, the noise and dust on the right-hand side of the slide. The next slide shows the second set of drivers for us, and that is reduction of mostly current liability, but avoidance of future liability for past practices. So you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, we've got a significant program in remediation of groundwater, soils, and sediment. There's a big UXO liability of the department. And of course, we're always alive to emerging contaminants, which adds really to the first bullet. And then we have a big program in pollution prevention, what used to be called pollution prevention. I guess the slide still calls it that, where we're really looking to reform the materials and technologies used in our weapons depots and maintenance facilities so that we avoid the contamination that's on the left-hand side of the slide in the future. Next slide, please. So we divide ourselves mostly for management purposes into these 4 program areas. And the reason I have this up on the slide right now is because later on, when we talk about the specific topics that we're soliciting for, they'll be divided by these 4 program areas. So up in the top right is environmental restoration, which is just traditional chemical cleanup. Below that is munitions response, which is, as you can see, mostly concerning itself these days with underwater unexploded ordnance. To the bottom left, resource conservation and resiliency is focused on all things defense installation built and natural infrastructure, protection of those things and maximization of the use. And then up in the upper left, weapon systems and platforms, which really concerns the entire defense industrial base. I talked earlier about the depots and maintenance facilities, but also production of energetic materials, explosives. All of that is covered by weapon systems and platforms. So now slide 9, please. So the thing that ties all of this together, each of those program areas, has a technical committee, and you can see in the box in the middle, it is made up of representatives from all the services and also our partner agencies, DOE and EPA, and they provide a real important role to us. They bring forward environmental requirements up to us from the services and the partner agencies. They help us with these statements of need, which is what we call our request for proposals. They help us put together solicitation, evaluate the proposals, and they help us look at funded projects. So they are really integral to our process. Slide 9, please. Excuse me, slide 10, I misspoke. So here, we're going to start getting into the nuts and bolts of the meat of the webinar that we're going to talk about today. So we really have solicitations in 2 types. Most of the work that you will see and most of the call that will come up in 6, 7 slides from now concerns core statements of need. You can see, and as we read through the sub bullets, we intend to make multiple awards per statement of need. It's not one winner per. These are mostly multi-year proposals. We also have a few limited scope proposals, which are we accept a few limited scope proposals, which are 1 year limited funding, $250,000 funding. That's for somebody that has a good idea but can't really fairly price a multi-year proposal and needs to do a year of work to firm up their plan. We have both a broad agency announcement and a federal call, and we'll see in a few minutes how those join up. So they're effectively the same. And then there's a second program called SERDP Exploratory Development, or SEED as we describe it. And these are the same as a statement of need, as a limited scope in the sense that it's $250,000 in approximately 1 year. But these are really meant to be high risk, high payoff work. So this is much more speculative, a good idea that could really turn into something. And they are covered by both the BAA and the federal call. Next slide, please. So here is the funding process, and I'm sorry, Laura, you're going to do a lot of clicking here. Okay, yeah, that's good. Let's click to there. Whoops, stop. So that gets us to, we're developing statements of need, which of course we've done in the past. We've put out the BAA and the federal call, which you've seen, which is presumably what drove you here. And then those things specify that we have pre-proposals due in early January, and the date comes up in a few slides from now. So if I say it now, I'll probably say it wrong. So let's just wait. Okay, now Laura, please one more click. So the pre-proposals undergo a cut, and we're really mostly looking for, do these actually match the statement of need? I'm going to tell you later on that you really need to pay attention to statement of need in your pre-proposal. We want to, if there's no meeting of the minds, we don't want you to do any more work, and we don't want to read any more proposals that are not going anywhere. So that's the cut from pre-proposal to full proposals. You'll be notified in January, 1st of February for full proposals due in early March. Next click, please. SERDP is really a two-step funding process. Step one is to the proposals go out to peer review, and this is to assure that they are scientifically meritorious, that this is a sound idea. Those that pass the peer review, and in most years it's 75 or 80% pass peer review. Next click, please. Now go to the second step, and the technical committees that I talked about earlier come back in, and they rank the proposals for DoD relevance. And that's the basis from which funding decisions are made. Next click, please. Selections are made from that. Of course, the ranked list from the technical committee matches up with the budget, lets you know how many projects we can fund. And then the final two clicks show you that after we select, there is one more step, which is the approval by our scientific advisory board. Sorry about that. I set you up, Laura. I apologize. Let's go to slide 12 now. So here are the actual dates. Pre-proposals are due on January the 7th, 2 in the afternoon Eastern time. As I said before, we try to get the word back out on which full proposals we request by early in February. We try hard to make sure you have 5 or 6 weeks to turn the pre-proposal, into full proposal. And then as that process that I showed you on the slide before plays out, we send notifications in July or August for either September or October presentation to our scientific advisory board. Notification shortly after. It says spring 2022 for project initiation because we don't get our funding right away at the beginning of the fiscal year. It takes time to do the contracting. So you're looking for starting actual work with a contract in place spring of 2022. And all of this stuff is, there's a hyperlink on the bottom of the slide. It's not a hyperlink for you. It's a URL on the bottom of the slide that shows you where you can get more details on this. Next slide, please. The seed is similar, but not the same. We don't send the seed proposals out to peer review. I think it is generally recognized that peer review biases against off-the-wall, high-risk ideas. So since that's what we're looking for, we skip the peer review step, which means that we can just go straight to full proposals, and they are due in March. Then they sync up with the rest of the non-seed things, and we move along. Next slide, please. So this is just the statistics from last year to give you an idea. It's not an impossible program to be funded in, but it's a relatively competitive program. So on the left-hand side are the rates of pre-proposals to selection. You can see, actually last year was a little higher than normal. It's often something like 10 or 11, 12%. The BA was a little higher last year. And if you see on the right-hand side, full proposals to selection is just a little over 1 in 3. So the way I like to look at it is 1 in 3 pre-proposals on average turns into a full proposal, and then 1 in 3 full proposals turns into a funded project. Down on the bottom is the seed statistics, and of course there's no pre-proposal there. So last year we took a fair number of seeds, 20%. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the kind of things that we use to do the selection criteria. And of course, these are outlined in the documents that are on the URL that you've seen twice before. So this is just to sort of talk them through. And if it brings up a question for anybody, you can raise a question. Clearly, there's a first gate, and I talked about that. Does it address the statement of need objective? We really have specific needs. It is not a good idea to take your technology and try to massage it to fit into our statement of need, because there's a lot of good technologies that fit our statement of need. And of course, the second question we're asking, is it the right technological maturity? And since we're pretty broad in SERDP, we can go from basic research through advanced technology development. Most projects are of the correct maturity. Then after you pass that pass-fail gate, then the standard sort of scientific selection criteria come in: technical merit, the personnel, the team that's been assembled, and then is the cost reasonable for the technical complexity? This is really a cost reasonableness criterion, not a total cost criterion. And then we also look in the full proposal, is there some plan laid out for how the technology being developed can ultimately impact the Department of Defense needs? Next slide, please. Seed selection criteria are similar, but a little bit abbreviated because these are 1 year higher risk proposals. You can see that mostly they focus on technical merit. Obviously, innovation is a strong part of that because these are meant to be, as I said about 27 times already, high-risk proposals. Next slide, please. So this is the end of my introduction, and people always ask, what does it take to write a competitive proposal? And I hope nothing on this slide is a surprise to you. I think I've said one of these words along in every other slide, but I'm going to just say them one more time. So clearly, the most important thing is you need to address the statement of need. Please don't try to fit something in the statement of need that doesn't really fit, because you're not really helping yourself. Once you do address the statement of need, then you need to demonstrate that you understand the state of the science. If there are relevant literature, you need to refer to it. If there's ongoing work that you've done, you need to discuss it. We also are really looking for hypothesis-driven work. This is a science program. We're not looking to just make up a matrix of all possible conditions and check them all. We want a driving hypothesis, and we want work that works on either proving or disproving that hypothesis. And then the technical approach, I think you need to make clear. You don't assume that everybody reading the proposal will be able to make the leap, that your technical approach is so obvious. Make sure you lay out what you're going to do and give a clear set of experiments or calculations, or experiments and calculations combined, that are going to get you to this falsifying or not falsifying the hypothesis that underlies the proposal. So I think with that, the next slide sets us up. We're going to talk about now each of the statements of need. This is where each of the individual program managers come in, and they will give you a little spin, on what they think they're looking for, and then that, of course, will set us up for questions as we get to the end. So the next slide will show you that we're starting with environmental restoration. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Leeson, the program manager for environmental restoration.
Okay, great. Thanks, Herb. Next slide, Laura. So as Herb mentioned, each of the program managers will be talking about our respective statements of need. And under environmental restoration, we have 4 statements of need this year. They all are addressing PFAS, and those of you familiar with the program know that we've been putting a lot of time into PFAS lately. These first 3 that I'll talk about are dealing with the ecotoxicity of PFAS. I would like to point out, you'll see at the bottom of this slide, there is a link to our webpage that we have on PFAS, and it's very important for you to take a look at that. Particularly in this area of ecotoxicity, we've already funded quite a bit of work on ecotoxicity, and the statement of needs that we're releasing are really intended to look at some of these data gaps, issues that we haven't been looking at so far. Or looking at in sufficient detail. So this first statement of need is really dealing with the ecotoxicity of the chemical mixtures associated with the AFFF. We have done a lot of ecotoxicity work on specific PFAS, but not necessarily as much on the mixtures themselves. And so that's what we're focused on here. Next slide, please. And then what we also are looking at is getting a better understanding of the ecotoxicity of PFAS in the marine environment. Much of our work to date has been focused on PFAS ecotoxicity in terrestrial organisms or in natural waters, groundwater, etc. Very little on the marine environment. And I did want to specifically point out that the whole issue of the bioaccumulation and biomagnification is of great concern in this area as well. Next slide, please. And then our last ecotoxicity statement of need is focusing on better understanding the risk of PFAS in avian species. Done a little bit on avian species in PFAS, but we would like to understand that a lot better. And so you can see that there's some specific data gaps are listed here that are of interest. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have this statement of need that is on treatment of PFAS impacted matrices. We have put a tremendous amount of resources in developing treatment technologies for PFAS. We certainly have more work to do in this area. And so this one is fairly broad. We really intended it for primarily a limited scope or the small scale studies where you're looking at something very innovative, high risk, to see if it's going to function before we put money into it for a full-scale project. But we will accept larger proposals if the idea is there. Again, I did want to point out, please do look at our webpage, look at what we've already funded in this area. We do have a lot of work going on under treatment, so you do want to take a look to see what's already been funded in that area. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Bradley, and he will cover the statements of need under the Munitions Response Program area.
Hello, everyone. Next slide, Laura. If you recall from the photograph shown earlier by Herb, our toolbox for looking for, classifying, and relocating munitions is never full. So it's a constant search for better equipment. An issue when you move to the second large bullet that we face is the actual cost of removal may be prohibitive. And if we have to actually leave the material in place, then we need to understand how it's going to behave. If we're dealing with the medium of both water and sediments, the water provides a dynamic aspect to it. We've seen that in the Gulf of Mexico this past year with repeated hurricanes. Those are things that we have to worry about. Part of the toolbox is the data that we collect is enormous in terms of its bandwidth, and we're looking for every possible way to analyze that data, which includes machine language. Another aspect of concern to us is that for testing, of course, we tend to use devices, surrogate munitions that are manufactured relatively recently. We're dealing with circumstances where these munitions may have been in place for up to 70 years or even longer. And so understanding their characteristics as they biofoul and corrode are also of importance. And if we are in fact dealing with the removal of these materials, the known costs need to be addressed, and mechanisms and ways to develop cost-effective recovery and disposal are also of primary importance. And with that, I'll stop and turn it over to our next speaker.
Hi, Kurt Preston, Resource Conservation and Resilience. If we can go to our next slide, please. So Resource Conservation and Resilience has 3 thrust areas. 2 of them will be addressed with statements of need this year, that being threatened and endangered species, and the second being resilience, both natural and built infrastructure. In the threatened and endangered species area, we are looking for proposals that would address the terrestrial species response to multi-stressors, and I think the key element here is we're looking at new approaches to being able to identify the impacts of multi-stressors. Now, one thing you will note is that there are a couple of species in the statement of need that are called out. Those are of particular interest, but you need not limit yourself to those if you're familiar with the impacts of other species on Department of Defense activities. All proposers, whether you are focused on these species or another species, have to make the argument of why that species is important, and also have to make the argument of why the work that you're proposing is of particular interest and merit. Next slide, please. The second statement of need is in our area of resilience, in particular resilience as it is associated with built infrastructure. In particular, we have an interest on the impacts of saltwater intrusion on Department of Defense and principally subsurface installation infrastructure. And we're looking to improve our understanding of future sea level change interactions with saltwater intrusion, and that from both a spatial and temporal perspective. And we have in the past, and we continue to take the approach of a scenario-driven understanding of our non-stationary climate. Specific research needs are listed, and it's important to note that there are 3 objectives and there are 3 research needs. And explicitly, we ask that the proposals address all 3 objectives and research needs. Towards that end, I would like you to note that in contrast to the previous statement of need, limited scope proposals are not encouraged for the saltwater intrusion statement of need. We are looking for robust multi-disciplinary efforts. Finally, in closing, I would also encourage those who are interested in submitting a pre-proposal to make sure you become familiar with the current approaches that the Department of Defense is taking, in particular, the regional sea level scenarios for coastal risk management. That document is available frankly from your favorite search engine, and you should demonstrate some familiarity with that in your proposals. Thank you for your time. Over.
Okay, so I'm Robin Neeson. Weapon Systems and Platforms is my program area. And we have 4 statements of need, core statements of need this year, and 1 seed statement of need. So I'll be going over them. Laura, next slide. So energetic materials is an area we've been looking at for our history. In this current statement of need, we're looking for computational methodologies to enhance our ability to designate and choose energetic materials and to understand what their toxicity parameters are. So we know that industries, specifically pharmaceutical industry, is really good at using computational methods, and they've been applied to, you know, pharmaceuticals. But those kinds of things have not been applied to energetic materials, and energetic materials tend to be classes of materials that have not been investigated with computational methods. So we're looking to develop those methods to help us choose what targets to go after, and also to understand what their toxicity and other physical parameters might be. Next slide, please. Getting back to the PFAS and AFFF world, we have been doing a lot of work in alternative formulations, and now what we're seeking with this statement of need is functional additives or modifications to firefighting equipment that will serve to make the equipment and the performance of that material work better. We would like drop-in replacements that are equivalent to the PFAS containing AFFF are unlikely to come out, but maybe there are some additives and potential for ways to modify equipment that will get us there. So we're looking for proposals that will enhance the firefighting performance, but will also meet the requirements for the firefighting community in terms of compatibility and storability. We say here that we already are investing in compressed air and ultra-high pressure nozzles, and we're not looking for proposals in those areas because we think we're covering it, and because those are not drop-ins. That's not something that we can just say, okay, we're going to go to compressed air for all of our firefighting systems. So we've kind of said we're not interested in those particular topics. Next, please. Chromium. So for many, many, many years, we've been looking at alternatives to hexavalent chrome. Hexavalent chrome is used in a lot of different surface treatments. And recently, the American Council of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, excuse me, have indicated that trichrome is also of considerable concern. Well, so now we're putting out a statement of need that says we're looking for chromium-free treatments and processes. So chromium is used either hexavalent and in a lot of cases trivalent chromium has been the answer. If we use trivalent chrome instead of hexavalent chrome, bottom line, we're now saying let's just get away from chromium, period. And these are the areas of interest. Passivates, inhibitors of corrosion, sealers, anodizers, adhesives, gap fillers, inhibitors, paint, strippers, and we're looking for materials that can meet one or more of those topic areas. Next. Finally, in terms of our core statements of need, we have this one on polymeric PFAS and munitions. Many munitions contain binders, and at times those binders are perfluorinated compounds like Teflon or Viton or Kel-F. And when we use them as intended, we're not really sure. If they're aluminized, maybe everything goes to aluminum fluoride. If there's calcium present, you might, produce calcium fluoride, but, do they go completely? Under what circumstances are they mineralized, or maybe not? Are small compounds produced? So in this particular statement of need, we're looking to understand how these polymeric PFAS behave, and when combusted, when incinerated, or when burnt in conjunction with munitions. So either alone or with the energetic material that they're binding. So we're looking for analytical techniques, but we're also looking for methodologies to show what is produced and to what extent is that fluorine mineralized to fluoride compounds. Next, please. And this is finally a seed effort on rare earth elements, recycling and reuse of rare earth elements. Rare earth elements, especially the heavy rare earths, are rare. The lighter rare earths, maybe not so much, but we use them in the Department of Defense for a number of things. And you find them in virtually all kinds of electronics, from cell phones to radio and radar equipment. And the bottom line is a lot of these materials are out in the field and don't generally get recycled. They get left in place. And we're looking to kind of find ways to recover those rare earth elements, especially the heavy rare earths, and minimize the waste produced when they are recycled. So we're looking for really some seed topics here, so 1 year, 250K, to show us how you would identify and recover and recycle those materials from electronic equipment, or to enhance the use of that material and to reduce the need for new rare earths out of the mining industry. So with that, I just have one more slide I'm going to talk about. So next, Laura. Our symposium is November 30th through December 4th of this year. It's a virtual symposium, and I encourage all participants today to go to that website, look at our agenda, and consider participating in our symposium. And with that, we're going to go on to questions.
So we have received a number of questions which we will answer as time permits, focusing on those that are generally applicable to all submitters or logistical in nature. First, we'll start off by answering some general solicitation questions we've received. So let's begin with, what is the typical period of performance for limited scope projects?
Okay, well, this is Herb. I will answer that, but before I answer it, I want to warn everyone that's listening. We normally do this in the normal times. We're all sitting in a room, so the handoff between each of us and among each of us for the questions is very smooth. So we're doing this virtually now, so if there's a hiccup and there's a little dead air, it just means that across the country, we're not focusing at each other so well. So let's go back to typical preferred performance limited scope. So they are by definition 1 year approximately. Obviously, we're not going to hold you to 365 days, and $250,000. So definitely the idea is to propose something that you can accomplish in a year. At the end of both either a seed or a limited scope project, one section in the final report is prospects for further research. So your goal in a limited scope would be to perform some experiments or some calculations, gather some data somehow that will let you really price a full multi-year proposal, and then you would propose it at the end of the report.
Next question, is communication with the program managers prior to the pre-proposal submittal allowed or encouraged?
Sure, I'll address that. We do encourage questions to the program managers before your pre-proposal. However, the questions should not be very specific about the content of your pre-proposal. For example, it wouldn't be appropriate for you to call up and say, I have this idea about a pre-proposal, what do you think? We don't answer questions like that. The questions we can answer are really more about if you want clarification on a particular aspect of the statement of need, or you want to better understand how the program functions as a whole. Those kind of questions are encouraged. And I will say that in every statement of need, the contact information for the program manager is listed at the end of the statement of need. And so they would be the person who would best be able to help you.
Okay. Next question, are federal entities able to apply for seed funding?
Yes. Federal seed is open to both. Actually, all three, I should say. Federal, private, and universities. If universities, although they fall under BAA, sometimes are thought of as separate. So anyone is available to apply for seed funding.
Okay, and this next question has to deal with one of the environmental restoration solicitations. Could you comment on the typical fund level for the previously funded PFAS proposals?
I can comment on that. It may not help you much, though. We've funded, I think, over 100 different projects on PFAS at this point, and the projects have ranged from limited scope or seeds, which are, roughly 250,000, up to much larger scale projects that closer to $2 million over 4 years or so. Some of the ecotoxicity projects are particularly, those are expensive to run. I would say on average, the cost is generally somewhere in the middle of that, roughly maybe 800,000 to $1 million for 3 or 4 years worth of effort. But it varies tremendously. And what we typically tell people is to really focus on the funds you believe are required to address the technical objectives of your proposal.
This is a question for the Weapons Systems and Platform Solicitation. Which of the heavy rare earths are specifically of interest?
I think the ones that produce the magnets, and I'm going to apologize here. I'll get back to you with an email on this, but there are certain rare earths that are the best magnetic, have the best magnetic properties, and so that would be one in particular. But there are others. I mean, bottom line is do some research in terms of where they're used and how they're used, and you'll find out that that the DoD in particular is using a lot of heavy rare earths in their electronics.
This is a question for the Resource Conservation and Resiliency Solicitation. For threatened and endangered species, are there particular stressors that are of interest, and if so, which are of priority?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is no, they're species specific. So there's not, I mean, that will be part of the argument that should be made in the pre-proposal and proposal. Also, just one real quick point of clarification. While Dr. Nelson was correct that most limited scopes are of 1 year, I need to clarify that in the resource conservation and resilience statement of need, due to the fact that a lot of times there's a field element, field work required for maybe 1 or 2 years. The statement of need allows for approximately a 2-year in duration limited scope. Over.
This is a question for the munitions response solicitation. Could you please elaborate on the munitions response program area's objective? The objective of the statement of need is to develop technologies to detect, classify, and remediate military munitions found at underwater sites.
Yes, the first part of the answer gets back to the medium that we're dealing with, and actually it's plural. It's both the water and the sediment underlying the water. So you have a complex medium circumstance. The objects we're looking for are metal, at least in some significant amount. So sensors in general can be any of the classic physical sensors that you might think of, which since you're multimedium dealing with water, acoustic sensors are of course a prime example. But we're looking for metallic objects, so magnetometers, electromagnetic radiation. In some circumstances, the waters overlying the sediments can be reasonably clear, so optical sensors are in play. So I am appreciative that my answer is not definitive. It's not going to be definitive because as I mentioned in my presentation, the toolbox is never full and it's never complete. So any sensor that exploits a characteristic of munitions that we're looking for is on the table. Thanks.
Next, we have a general solicitation question. Does SERDP fund organizations outside of the United States? If so, what percentage of SERDP's overall funding is typically sent to foreign organizations? And can foreign organizations be the lead organization?
Well, I'll answer the first and third part of that question first. We definitely do fund organizations outside of the United States. I would say that every year we do have a handful of projects that are going to organizations outside the United States. And in several of those cases, the foreign organization is the lead, so we don't have any limitations on that. And then, of course, we do have projects where foreign organizations are co-performers. As far as the percentage, though, I really don't know that number. It's relatively small. I would certainly say it's less than 5% of those awarded is probably to a foreign organization. But that's about all I can tell you on that in that regard.
Another general solicitation question. If the project is a collaboration between a university and a federal agency, should it be submitted through BAA or federal call?
So that's a difficult question to answer in the abstract. I think that it's a team decision. Who really, or which of the partners or which of the many partners is really playing a lead role? If it's the federal agency, then it should be through the federal call. If it's a private sector person, it should be through the BAA. If we do fund a joint project like that through the BAA, the federal dollars we send directly to the federal organization. So we only contract with the private sector or university organization for their share. The rest of it goes directly. So I think it's an intellectual lead issue, not really a what do we prefer issue.
This question is for the weapons systems and platform solicitation. Would a technology that turns IMX UXO non-explosive / less sensitive be of interest?
Sorry, that was for me, right?
Yes.
Sir.
So repeat it, because it sounded like it fit more in.
Yes. Would a technology that turns IMX UXO non-explosive or less sensitive be of interest?
It doesn't, apparently doesn't seem to fit the statement of need we have out there for computational methods. I'm trying to work out in my mind where that does or if that does, and it's not sounding to me like it fits the call that we have out there right now.
Thanks, Robin.
So over.
This question is for the munitions response solicitation. Can you elaborate on the meaning of underwater is atmospheric, cyclic, or full immersion, or a combination of all these aspects? Is this for storage?
It's a good question. The way I would answer it is kind of in two parts. For what I would call live sites where munitions are in place and have been there for a number of years, we tend to think of them in sort of two different ways. One is buried beneath the sediment itself and its stability in the burial process. The second is the term we would use is proud, meaning it's sitting on the seafloor and effectively in the water column itself. We're not particularly dealing, although there is an aspect from the earlier program which was more terrestrial in nature, of having ordnance sitting on the surface of dry land, if you will, but that's not a common circumstance. Thanks.
This question is for the environmental restoration solicitation. If there is a skill or capability that can be provided, can prospective investigators find out who is putting proposals together on PFAS in particular? Should I let a program manager know the skill and they could make the connections?
So that is not normally something we do. The most we typically do is that if a proposer will need access to a DoD site, we will provide a DoD liaison that will assist with that, but we don't necessarily put people together. You know, having said that, you are welcome to contact me offline if this is something really unique and that we can evaluate that, but typically it's not something we would do.
This is a general solicitation question. What is the technical background of the technical committees? In other words, in what level of technical detail should proposals be written for this audience?
So that is a very perceptive question, and I'm glad somebody asked that. I often say that, I often talk to people about this later. So there's really a wide range of technical background on the technical committees. There are researchers from DoD laboratories, but there are also people that do cleanups and so a more operational side. So definitely writing, when you get to the full proposal stage of SERDP, it is a little bit of a hard problem in that you have to both write it in a sophisticated enough manner that the peer reviewers understand that you know the state of the science and are proposing something of value, but make sure that when you walk somebody up to a conclusion, you make sure you draw that conclusion for them so that everybody at both sets of the thing will get it. You have 15 pages, so that gives you some space, but it's definitely an art to write a full SERDP proposal.
Okay, this question is for the weapons systems and platform seed solicitation. For the WP seed topic on rare earth elements, should a single proposal cover all three areas: identify, recover, and recycle?
I would answer that would be the preference. We are looking for something that gets us to that end game, but we're also understanding that this is a seed request, so all will be considered. And if someone comes in with a novel process that gets you from beginning to end, that would be treated with more, would have a higher chance of receiving funding, I would guess. Over.
This is a general solicitation question. In how many pre-proposals and full proposals can an investigator participate as a PI or co-PI?
We don't have a limit on that. You know, we don't really look at that to see how many proposals an investigator is listed on. I would say that if you are the lead on a proposal, that's a substantial amount of work. If both get selected, or you know, more than two get selected to submit a full proposal, you have a relatively short amount of time from the time you get the request to put in a full proposal. So, you know, being able to divide your efforts between multiple proposals would be challenging. So that would really be up to you. We do not put that limit on you.
Another general solicitation question. Can you please elaborate on the 2021 proposals that are still on hold and how that will affect the 2022 call?
So I can elaborate in general, but obviously not on any specific proposal. So I think if you look, there are not very large overlap between the statements of need from 21 and the statements of need for 22. There's certainly they certainly address the same large topics, but the individual spin of them is pretty different. So we don't yet have any of our funding for 21, and there is not a DoD budget for 21 yet, so we don't know about the total funding levels we're going to have available, which is why some very worthy projects are on hold, because we don't want to get somebody's all spun up that we're going to be able to fund them if we end up taking us a budget cut somehow. And you know, the budget in the United States is not in very good shape, so there's always a chance that you're going to take a budget cut. So I think they're not really connected. Obviously, someone that has asked this question thinks that they have an idea that they should submit again, and that's really not necessary. I mean, if we end up having the money to fund you in 21, we'll fund you. You don't have to resubmit. So I hope I answered both sides of that question and hit what you were really asking.
Another general question. Can the same person submit proposals in response to both the core SONs and seed SONs?
Well, I just want to make sure this could be looked at in two different ways. If the question is related to the one I answered earlier, where, you know, can the same person be a lead on multiple proposals, then yes, that is the case, that you can do that. If you're trying to perhaps hedge your bets and you're submitting the same topic under the seed and under the core, we suggest you don't do that. You know, it would be best to choose one. If you don't understand very well, you know, the two different programs, contact the program manager for that statement of need, and they can help you work out what's appropriate.
This is a question for the Weapon Systems and Platforms solicitation. In this presentation, you indicated that there are items left in place that contain rare earth elements. Could you please elaborate on what these items are?
Well, the simple one might be cell phones, but any kind of equipment that is used in the field. The other is, let's say, goggles, night vision, things like that. And I don't presume they're left in the field. I presume that they don't work anymore, and we're not necessarily packaging them up and shipping them back. But the bottom line is we're looking for things that have circuit boards associated with them, so all kinds of electronic components, and we're not specifying, because again, this is a seed, so we're looking for exploratory type of work. So we're, you know, in general, laptops, things like that, any kind of electronic. Over.
General solicitation question, is the peer review blinded?
So I assume that what was being asked is the name of the investigator left off of this proposal when we send it to peer reviewers? And the answer to that is no, if that's what you're asking, because one of the selection criteria is that this an appropriate team. It's very difficult for the peer reviewers. I suppose if you were real slick, you could put in references without names and everything, but it's very difficult for the peer reviewers to understand whether the team and the investigator are qualified to do the work without a name. The other half, of course, is right. The peer reviewers themselves are blinded, and you won't know who the peer reviewers were. When you get your peer review comments, they'll just be identified as reviewer 1, 2, 3, and 4.
This is a question for the environmental restoration solicitation. For the PFAS thermal degradation statement of need, what timescales of products are you looking at? Microseconds to milliseconds and all the way to hours later?
Well, I want to make sure you're looking at the correct statement of needs. So we released a statement of need on PFAS thermal degradation for last year. And this year we have the 3 ecotoxicity statement of needs, and we have 1 on treatment. Now, if you're talking about doing something on thermal processes under that new treatment statement of need, you know, I would certainly think when we're talking about thermal processes, you need to look at the very small scales. But we would also look to the proposer to really lay out the rationale for their study. We don't really dictate, you know, to that level how the project should be conducted, but please do look at the current statements of need for FY22.
Andrea, I'm going to jump in a little because that question could be going to weapon systems and platforms.
You're very right.
With respect to thermal, and there I'd say we're looking at combustion processes, incineration, that kind of time frame, but also propellants, explosives. So ultimately, we're interested in a variety of timescales and thermal, you know, conditions for the WP effort. Thank you.
This is a question for the Resource Conservation and Resiliency Program Area solicitation. What are DoD relevant threatened, endangered, and at-risk species? Are they all species in the federal list?
So, good question. The relevant threatened and endangered species are those that have a material impact on the operations of our key installations. The 3 examples provided give you some insight into not only specific species, but species types that we would have particular interest in. It depends on the region of the country. In the desert Southwest, as you might expect, the desert tortoise is of particular interest. In the Southeast, historically, the red-cockaded woodpecker has been of particular interest. To the question of whether they have to be federally listed to be of interest to the Department of Defense, the answer to that question is no. They can be species which are at risk of being listed, and as a result of that listing would have impacts on the Department of Defense use and operation of its installations. Thank you.
General question, is it best to contact the DoD bases at which we intend to perform the proposed research in order to obtain cooperation agreements?
I would be careful about the word best in that question. It is certainly a good thing if you have a contact at the base and you think you can get something set up in advance. But as Andrea answered in one of her earlier answers that sort of relates to this, we will, if you need access to a DoD installation, we will assign you, and obviously you're not a DoD person, we'll assign you a DoD liaison who will help you navigate that. So if you need to do work at an installation, but you don't have contacts there or you don't know where you want to go, the way you handle that in the proposal is very carefully lay out the requirements. This would be done at a base that has some amount of contamination, or it would be done at a depot that has a line that does chromium, whatever is appropriate to you. And then we'll help you match up with somebody that is an appropriate place to do some work.
Okay, and I think we have time for just one more question. This is for Andrea and or Robin. Do PFAS and PFOA have to be excluded from the PFAS mixtures?
I'm going to assume that was related to the statement of need that was on ecotoxicity of PFAS mixtures, but no, they should not be excluded. You know, the point is to see how the mixture of all of these common PFAS impact the ecotoxicity.
Okay, that is just about the time that we had allotted for this webinar. So thank you for attending. And as a reminder, recording of this presentation as well as the actual slides will be available on the SERDP and ESTCP website on the SERDP solicitation page. Thank you for attending the webinar today, and this concludes today's webcast.